Hey guys, how's it going? So today, keeping with our basic battle tactics, we're going to talk about the spoiling attack. So what the spoiling attack is, in a most simplistic sense, very simplistic, is that it's basically an attack that we launch against an enemy to preempt an attack that they are already planning. And so, obviously, basically what we want to do is we want to in some way mess with the attack that they're about to launch on us. Now, this isn't typically you don't typically think of a spoiling attack as like something that we launch an attack and that this like kills their attack altogether, anything like that. So this is, in particular when it comes to large scale attacks, what we want to do is we want to reduce the offensive power or the hitting power of the enemy's attack if we can. If we can throw off his timing or delay the start time, start day, something like that, that's what we're looking for. From a spoiling attack. So now, kind of thinking about it, it's very obvious. So like, if we're going to set up for offensive operations, particularly if you think about like major military operations, it takes a humongous amount of supplies, and also manpower and vehicles and things to execute very large scale offensive actions. And so obviously all of this has to be brought into the general area, where you're going to launch the attack for obvious reasons. So what that means is that there are certain times when there's a lot of stuff in an area that, A, might be an inviting target for us to hit, but also that, can't necessarily respond to offensive actions by us, by the enemy, as they're setting things up, just because the nature of getting people together, getting, elements together, and then setting them into like the actual, like battle groups, tactical groups, the Kampfgruppen, that they're going to be operating in, when it comes to this. So this is also a time when if we can, you could think about attacking enemies' supply or potentially like transit, or like maybe be like river crossings or things like that. In some way, messing with that. So now typically you don't think of a spoiling attack. It doesn't stop the enemy offensive, typically speaking. What it is, it's more like we want to mess with it. We want to in some way screw with it. And so this has, a couple like obvious reasons. So one, obviously, if an enemy wants to be the most successful, they want to have, like an artillery barrage that starts exactly on time and probably has very pre-selected targets and pre-selected general time frames they're going to be attacking those targets, also in coordination with their air and, other rocket artillery, things like that. They're also going to have specific start times that, like, the armored group or the infantry group or the the infiltrators, the sapper units are going to move forward, maybe cut barbed wire, demine an area, maybe set up like hasty river crossings, things like that. So if we can in some way mess with that, now we can throw it off to where now, maybe the artillery barrage and all that takes place at the exact time, but now the armor element that was supposed to move out, they're delayed by 5 or 6 or 10 hours because we blew up the bridging vehicle that they were going to use, or maybe we blew up the bridging vehicle. So now instead of being able to launch this attack from multiple different points, maybe now they kind of one of these armored group has to go around and use somebody else's crossing point. So that's kind of ways to think of that. And also, we want to mess with their coordination. So obviously getting all these elements together, getting them coordinated, getting them kind of split into their their different subunits and their groupings that they're going to be in. And then if we could launch spoiling attacks that happen to hit communication centers or cut communication lines and things like that, those are ways that we could definitely mess with an enemy. So now kind of in the classics, not really classic, the classic modern sense, what the spoiling attack is it's typically an armored assault through our lines into an enemy grouping and then a specific retreat. So you can almost think of it as a raid when it comes to that. So for example, I'm a raid with the enemy here. So the enemy and my front line are roughly even, but the enemy is grouping mass forces behind there because they're going to launch some sort of offensive element. So I managed to get together a small armored punch here, small armored group. So we're going to punch through the enemy's line here. And we're going to be able to engage some of these enemies. Maybe we destroy some vehicles, disable some vehicles. We blow up, we hit some of their fuel trucks and things like that. At the end of this, like, okay, maybe we had, suffer a little bit of casualties there and pull back here. So now we're able to throw off the timing, throw off the hitting power, of this, and just kind of mess with the general operation of the attack. And so spoiler attacks, kind of historically speaking, there's sort of a lot of like famously the Russians, the Soviets, knew about when the Germans were going to launch Operation Citadel So the attack of the Kursk salient, July 5th, 1943. And so they launched massive, like rocket and artillery strikes into the assembly areas. Like previously, kind of really messed with the Germans' coordination and messed with, like their last second kind of grouping and preparation before they actually took off. So just to kind of mess with that, because obviously when it comes to attacking, the most dangerous portion is going to be when we initially leave our defensive positions, leave our rallying points and our otherwise, like our marshaling areas, and actually approach out into, the enemy's, forward zones and their battle zones and stuff like that. That's when we're the most exposed, to enemy fire and to damage, to taking damage and things like that. So being able to in some way mess with an enemy as they leave their, the relative safety of their, their kind of their marshaling areas and their, their groupings and stuff like that is a good way to, at the very least, kind of, decrease the hitting power, decrease a little bit of the force that we suffer from this offensive attack. That's going to help us withstand that, and then maybe help us set up our own counterattacks and things like that, kind of depending on the situation. But again, so spoiling attack, the basics of it, it's an attack that we launch against an enemy that is making preparations for an offensive action themselves. It is not in and of itself something that, typically speaking, stops the enemy attack, but it's something that we do to basically mess with it, to kind of throw off their footing, to make them a little bit off balance, or to mess with their timing, or to get it so that the artillery moves too far ahead of the infantry and things like that. But remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.